Folks, the weekends are meant to be fun, and we are definitely going to have a fun weekend in both MLB and MLS as the Guardians have their home opener today. The Reds take on the Phillies in Philadelphia, and then in MLS, Columbus will take on DC United, and FC Cincinnati will have a rematch of their playoff game from last year as they play off and host the Philadelphia Union this Saturday. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown. I'm Mahirson Hassan. A good Friday to you all. And I start off today with giving my condolences to Chad Brendel, who is the owner of Bearcat Journal, does a lot of work with the UC Bearcats. His wife, Kelly, unfortunately passed away earlier this week after a battle with cancer. Again, I've been lucky that none of my family members, at least family members that close, have been dealing with cancer and any other sicknesses of that regards and passed away at that point. Again, my condolences to Chad as well. My grandmother in India, she passed away from cancer a few years ago. Just seeing my dad go through that, be on the phone with his sisters and of course with his mom just a few years ago at around the time lockdown was going on. It was quite emotional for him, and I'd expect it was the same for Chad and all of the family members that were close to Kelly. I should also say that Chad has created a GoFundMe page to help with the hospital costs and end-of-life expenses. I will put the link in my Twitter and also on this YouTube page, wherever you are watching this video. Any of the money that is left after the end of life and after the hospital cost expenses will go towards their daughter Kelsey's college funds. So once again, rest in peace to Kelly. Again, a strong fighter, strong fan of Bearcat Journal and of the UC Bearcats. And of course, she will have a great legacy both here with Buckeye Sports Breakdown and with the Bearcat community, and especially with Chad. And so on to the sports now. And for the Cincinnati Reds, playing pretty solid. As I mentioned last week, lost their opening day game to the Pirates, but ever since then went 3-1, which includes a 3-game win streak. They've also had a few games postponed. They were supposed to play the Cubs on Wednesday to wrap up that series. That got postponed in Cincinnati. They were supposed to play the Phillies last night. That got postponed, and their home opener is currently going on right now in Philadelphia. It's currently about afternoon that when I'm recording this, about midday here in Phoenix, but later afternoon when those two teams are actually playing off right now, in fact. But back to what I was saying earlier, you talk about the Reds, you talk about what they're doing, you definitely see that this team has confidence early in their games. Their pitching has remained consistent down the stretch. It's almost works in a tandem. You know, you have the homers, you have the Viking helmets. I'll talk more about that later in the podcast. And then you have just great pitching to back it up. At the same time, maybe it falters down the road, as we saw on Tuesday, I believe. Yes, Tuesday against the Cubs, where they lost 12-5, and Buck Farmer once again was a losing pitcher. Had that label also in the opening day loss to the Pirates. And I was listening to that opening day game on Reds Radio Network, and I remember Tommy Thrall and Reds Cowboy were both saying the fact that when you get to this point in the season, you have to get your pitches down, and simply Buck Farmer just is still working through the process of perfecting some pitches and making sure it's perfect. And that may be coming back to haunt him, especially from what we've been seeing in his past few appearances on the mound. But nonetheless, I think it's showing throughout the bullpen at times. Don't get me wrong. They've played great. They've been able to keep the wins, both games against the Pirates in the latter two games, I should say. And then their game on Monday, that too. A lot of great hitters, but they needed 3 pitchers in the top of the 7th on Tuesday. The Cubs got 6 runs to make it, I believe, 8-3 at the end of that stint. But nonetheless, I mean, you can tell it reminds me a little bit of 2021 with the Reds, where Amir Garrett said these are showboating sons of guns. And we're seeing this. I mean, you have the home runs going in, 10 so far, which honestly is amazing. And 10 home runs means 10 Viking helmets. And I did some background because I was like, where in the world does Cincinnati, Ohio, a German-based town, get a Viking helmet? And you have to credit Luis Cessa for getting this down, where last year he thought Jake Fraley looked like a Viking. Again, a debatable chance, and I'm going to look up Jake Fraley right now to see if he does look like a Viking. Well, he kind of does look like a Viking. I'd actually have to agree with him. He's got the beard. He's got a little bit of a reddish tint in there, like Eric the Red. So Cesa's got a valid point to say that Fraley is definitely looking like a Viking. And he almost credit to Cesa as well. He wanted to get a metal helmet, but ended up just going with the plastic one because he thought the metal one would be too heavy and just unsafe in that area. But nonetheless, back to the home runs. It just feels like when the Reds start getting home runs, and we've seen it before. We've seen it, especially when this team was playoff contenders, back in the early 2010s. It almost seems like everybody's in it. Everybody wants to wear the helmet. And like I mentioned, 10 home runs, 8 guys have worn the helmet, including Jake Fraley. And it's important it shows what this team is capable of. And as I said before, simply put, fun to watch. Looking at their opponent, which, like I mentioned before, the first game going on right now in Philadelphia, the Phillies were the last team in the MLB to get their first win of the season. They were swept by the Rangers in Arlington, and then went 1-2 versus the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. Again, tough test overall. Don't get me wrong. The Yankees are always a tough opponent to play. And then the Rangers actually started off the year pretty good. First time in a while that a team started off the year with at least 10 runs in both games, beating the Phillies 11-7 on opening day, and then the game after beating them 16-3. So quite impressive there from the Rangers. Will be interesting to see how they do in the AL, especially that hotly contested AL West. More on that later when we talk about the Guardians. But back to the Phillies, just tough test overall. And I was just wondering, how does their lineup look now, especially after that trip to the World Series? And the reigning National League champs have made some moves. 3 guys in the lineup in the one game where they did win against the Yankees. It was a 4-1 win, I believe, on Tuesday. 3 of those guys started Game 6 versus the Astros in the World Series. And Bryson Stott and Brandon Marsh, who were in the starting lineup versus the Yankees on Tuesday, were pinch hitters in that World Series game. So you still have some guys moving around. Again, Kyle Schwarber, one of the guys who was in that lineup, he was the DH for that game against the Yankees, not a field player. And it kind of just shows this team's moves they're making. I mean, hey, this is a team that's got Trey Turner. And I mean, if we were to go back to March, Trey Turner was probably the most talked about guy, at least amongst U.S. players, when you just saw his performance in the World Baseball Classic, especially that 3-run homer against Venezuela. So, hey, Trey Turner is a great pickup for the Phillies. And again, it's still a solid squad, just a little bit bumps in the road. And it will be interesting to see how they match up against the Reds team. Most of these games are pretty much 50-50 throughout the series, according to the ESPN projections. Again, some interesting pitcher duels as well, especially going on right now. Hunter Green for the Reds and Zach Wheeler for the Phillies. So we talked Reds, and now we're on to the Guardians. Again, another team in Ohio above 500, 5-2, or 5-2 rather, to start the season. They have a home opener at 4:10 Eastern today. That's about 25 minutes from now from when I'm recording this. And it will be, again, against the Seattle Mariners. I've noticed this in MLB scheduling, and I don't know if they're doing this on purpose or this is just coincidence, but it almost seems like a team plays a series against another team. Another series will be against a different team. And then the next series will be against that same prior team, but at another venue. I saw this between the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers because last week the Dodgers were hosting the Diamondbacks, and then you have a different series. And then last night, the Diamondbacks had their home opener here at Chase Field in downtown Phoenix, where they played the Dodgers. So I thought it was really interesting. It might be because of the scheduling overall. Of course, this will be the first year where you're seeing teams play, I think, of course, with the D-backs, they're going to be playing every MLB team this year. So it will be interesting to see how the scheduling works. I saw it with the Phillies and Reds as well. After this series, you have another series where the Reds and Phillies play other teams, and then those two are back to playing each other, but at Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. So I just thought it was an interesting coincidence. Might be seeing that a lot this year. But back to the Guardians. Strong one against the Mariners, went 3-1 in that series, and then 2-1 in Oakland. Yes, 2-1 in Oakland, and actually both of their wins came in extra innings. Quite interesting, especially for a Guardian team that had 19 extra inning games last year, most of which they ended up winning, rightfully so. I mean, if you end up winning the AL Central, you should be winning most of those games, but they also did it at a hefty margin. I should also mention that their one loss to the Athletics in Oakland was a 4-3 loss on Tuesday. But the one revelation I would definitely say for the Guardians, and I talked about it after their opening day loss where they were stymied by Luis Castillo, was get your offense to life. And we've definitely saw it in the series against the A's, 12-11 victory being one of them, that one too in extra innings. This team is definitely known for playing clutch. This is a team that's definitely known for having a lot of guys stepping up to the plate and being good. I mean, like I said, you got Naylor, you got Ramirez. I mean, Stephen Kwan also had a good series against Oakland. Again, it just shows that even though the bullpen, especially depth-wise, could have some things that they could work on, especially Karinchak, who, like Buck Farmer with the Reds, has 2 losing pitcher designations in his name. One was on opening day where he gave up the Ty France 3-run homer, and then the walk-off single for the Athletics on Tuesday. But back to what I was saying about the Guardians, you're playing the Mariners again. So again, back to my point, but on the mound, pretty good stretch, I'd say. You got Seivelt today, Quantrill, and Plesac. You got Quantrill and Seivelt. They no Luis Castillo on the mound, which is a really good thing for the squad, especially knowing how Castillo stymied them in that opening day game and just seeing how that team has almost come to fruition in ways. You know, it feels like whenever this team picks up a victory, they're putting up at least 5 or 6 runs. Hey, I'd wish the Diamondbacks would do that. If you don't know, the Diamondbacks have a deal that basically say if the D-backs score at least 5 runs, you get Taco Bell, and essentially you get a Taco Bell meal for free. For the most part, you still have to pay taxes and stuff. And hey, broke college student right here, I would definitely take it. Well, I don't know. But yeah, back to the Guardians and the Mariners. Mariners, again, struggled against the Guardians at home, and it also showed in their next series against the Angels, 1-2. So they are 2-5 to start off the year against 2 potent sides. Again, the Angels have always been in a little bit of, they're kind of a little overrated, knowing they have Shohei and Mike Trout on that squad. But just knowing their offense in general, I was going through the stat sheet and whoever was showing up. You had Ohtani, who homered in the first game and actually pitched the final game, winning pitcher, and that is the Angels won, I believe, 4-1. Rengifo, again, doing pretty well. I even saw Brandon Drury, former Toronto Blue Jay, former Red as well. I actually did not know how talented this team was because, and that might just be a thing about the Angels, is you look at Shohei, you look at Mike Trout, and you say, boom, we got a World Series team right here. But then you realize, well, you've got some interesting players. And Rengifo, another guy that's played mid at sometimes, but again is kind of posted up throughout. And then Brandon Drury had a great shift with the Reds last year. But yeah, Progressive Field, back to hosting baseball, hosted playoff baseball for the first time in a while last year. So there's definitely a lot of hopes. There's definitely a lot of talent in Cleveland from what we've seen. And even though, you know, there's some changes downtown, the capacity of the stadium has gone down, especially over the past few years. It's still great to have that sort of atmosphere, especially for a team and what Terra Francona is doing over there in Cleveland. So we're talking baseball. I'll take a quick break and I'll talk MLS. Big games for both Columbus Crew and FC Cincinnati, who are currently both in the playoff picture. Cincinnati and Columbus have both been fighting over the title of Soccer City USA, at least here in Ohio, especially from the culture that is around both of those teams. They have a lot of great fans, great supporter sections. Both of them have new stadiums in the state of Ohio as well. But the biggest thing that makes Ohio probably Soccer State USA right now is because of their play overall. FC Cincinnati is at the top of the East, first overall in that category, and second in the power rankings overall in MLS. Columbus is not that far behind them in fourth overall. Again, Columbus not dropping too many points, and FC Cincinnati still one of the three unbeaten teams left in MLS this season. So a lot to talk about, and just like that, let's get to it. And we'll start off with the capital city of Ohio in Columbus Crew. Again, Lower.com Field is turning into a fortress. After beating Atlanta 6-1 last week, they beat RSL 4-0 this past weekend. Absolutely electric. And it's really at this point when I'm thinking of the future for Columbus. When you have teams like New England Revolution, which is their next home game, when you have Inter Miami coming soon, even when you have teams that are stalwarts, Philadelphia, or hey, maybe a Hell is Real matchup. Oh boy, Lower.com Field is going to be host to a lot of great games overall. Speaking of which, and this applies for both Columbus and Cincinnati, Apple TV, I have a little bit of a beef with you, and it's mainly with Jake Zivin and Taylor Twellman. I see you all covering a lot of games from LA, Seattle, all the teams out west. And don't get me wrong, St. Louis FC is playing amazing right now. So is LAFC. So is Seattle Sounders. But you have FC Cincinnati, who is number 2 right now. And you have Columbus, who is slowly working their way up. Don't tell me that you're just going to be covering teams, or rather, you're going to be covering FC Cincinnati and Columbus just when they face each other because it's a Hell is Real matchup, because the views are there. Sure, it's a Heineken rivalry week staple, but at the same time, you have to go in, especially on the Eastern Conference. These teams are electric, okay? They've had their flaws, but they are electric. You need to cover some more FC Cincinnati games. You need to cover more Columbus Crew games. You need to put them in free. And I've definitely seen it with FC Cincinnati. Kudos to that, but definitely towards Columbus and Jake Zivin and Taylor Twellman. You guys better get your tails to one of those two stadiums sometime soon, because I don't know who's scheduling y'all to go out to the West Coast, but I don't like it. The East Coast, and especially Ohio, needs some attention because these teams are really good right now. All right, off of my soapbox and back towards Columbus and how they're doing right now. Again, simply put, electric. Christian Ramirez, once again up top. I believe Cucho was coming back from international duty, so he got some rest. But how about this? Lucas Zelarayan is a magician. And again, you will see it a lot on the score sheet. Had a goal from the penalty spot. But if you watch the highlights, this dude is orchestrating a passing magician, a passing orchestra that's probably better than any symphony right here in the Phoenix area, probably even better than Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra or anything in Ohio, because the way he just gets 1-2 passes. You know, he had a nifty back heel for Aiden Morris, so Morris could get his first goal. He had a nifty 1-2 with Nagbe, and Nagbe's shot was safe, trickle down, tap in by Aiden Morris, again, the Columbus native. It shows that this team is at a different level when this dude is on the pitch. And I think we also saw a little bit of a forthcoming with Aiden Morris. Again, Morris, as I mentioned before, was in the homegrown system. I believe went to New Albany High School, again, another school in the Columbus area. So he's definitely used to being around the club, being around the culture. And I think the biggest thing I saw out of Morris was, despite him playing a midfielder role, he understands the spacing on when he needs to come up into the box and get finishes going. You know, at the first goal, he saw that space over there, had great communication with Zella Ryan, first time finish, and then simply put, it's 1-0. Even on the second goal as well, even with that tap in and the trickling going forward, he realizes as a midfield, he's got to smell blood in the water, and he gets it forward and he gets it going. That's a really good move there by Aiden Morris, a guy that's really starting to grow, especially this year, and especially how he's been playing at home too, backing a goal performance against Atlanta with 2 goals against RSL. So kudos to that young man. But I'd also want to note with Columbus, they have a lot of depth at the striker position, mainly with you got Max Armstrong, Yeboah, and you got Russell Rowe. And Yeboah actually scored in stoppage time too. So kudos to him. But kudos to Columbus in general for having that much depth of the striker. You have 3 guys who could definitely, at the very least, create an attack and create chances, which is probably the forefront thing of any forward, and then for any striker, simply put, score goals. But when you look at that kind of depth, you got Arston, who could have scored and did score against Atlanta United, Yeboah, who scored against RSL, and Russell Rowe, who has also put up some numbers in production as well. That's what I see from Columbus, because especially when your backs are against the wall and it's a tight battle. You know, Columbus was notoriously known for allowing a lot of late goals in their games last year. And this is almost a counteract to say, here's the thing, if they score late, heck, we got guys too. We can score right back. And that might be a rallying cry for them overall. And again, it just comes down to little things like possession, and then also defense. Not too many chances from RSL, although they strung some interesting passes and sequences together. Again, Eloy Room was not playing, but Schulte, their backup goalkeeper, solid performance by him. They go on the road once again, and again, the road has not been a kind place for the Columbus crew. This time they're headed to the nation's capital to face DC United. Rematch of that game at lower.com stadium as the crew beat them 2-0. And DC United, again, coming off a little bit of a defensive battle. You know, they were stopped overall by Chicago. 0-0 that game ended up. 0 chances created by DC United, 42% of the possession. And ever since beating Toronto FC 3-2, where we saw Benteke and Klitsch and all these guys that have the talent, especially from playing over in the Premier League, it hasn't looked the same for DC United at home. Drew Orlando 1-1 and then lost to the Revs 2-1 in their last home battle. So that's my look at Columbus. I think, especially knowing how that offense plays, if you have the confidence to go on the road, this team, 1, can get 3 points on Saturday, and 2, can definitely be a contender in the East. And now let's head down the I-71 to check out FC Cincinnati. And again, I have to pick out another Matt Doyle quote here. Another week, another grinded out, get the job done by all means necessary win for Cincy. That's 4 1-goal wins and 3 1-0 wins so far this year. It's not beautiful soccer yet, but if we're being honest, what's prettier than being on top of the Eastern Conference? First off, a great lead there for FC Cincinnati. But second, he's honestly true. Again, I it seems a little nervy when you're like, well, it's another victory. You feel like the shoe's going to drop. And again, who knows? Philadelphia, pretty quality opponent, especially from what we saw last year. If it wasn't for how good LAFC played, they could have easily gotten the Supporters' Shield trophy. But nonetheless, it shows that Cincinnati's being very gritty. And it's something you have to understand about Cincinnati. They're a gritty city. Sure, when you look at how the Bengals are playing this year, and especially last year when they went to the Super Bowl, you can easily say, well, here's the thing, Cincinnati's a flashy city, and rightfully so. But you have to understand, even with the Bengals, even with FC Cincinnati's offense, especially last year, even with guys like the Big Red Machine back in the 70s, you have to understand that Cincinnati is built off of grit. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing. I don't know if Noonan's a little bit mad on what he's seen. Maybe he is, and especially knowing their performance against Miami. But simply put, you get the job done. And that's Cincinnati in a nutshell right there. Maybe they're a team, when you look on paper, you'll say, you know what, maybe they're not MLS Cup favorites. Maybe they'll lose in the playoffs. But at the rate they're going, I still see this team as MLS Cup contenders, maybe favorites if you don't consider the way LAFC has been playing. So again, let's see if we can beat LAFC. But back to my thing about FC Cincinnati, it just looks sloppy overall, especially in the back line. Almost gave up a penalty. Luckily, it was actually, they did not call a penalty there. I think it was Pizarro who was pressing for Inter Miami. they played a lot more open. They let Miami sneak into some open spots and definitely create some chances. Miami's not a team. Miami is a lot like Juan Agudelo in the ways that you don't look at their goals and say, all right, it's good, but they always are meant to like shoot some long shots, especially from outside of the box, and especially create some electricity going forward. Maybe that's part of Phil Neville's chemistry. Maybe it's just a chance when it comes into the game, but that's part of Inter Miami overall. But back to my point about FC Cincinnati, just a lot of late, just a lot of being late to the ball, a lot of late yellow cards, which I thought was interesting. Lucho got booked, Brenner got booked when he was going off, just to name a couple. And again, I think it might just be a case of discipline overall. You're at home, the tempers are flaring too. You got Miami, and again, it seems like the way FC Cincinnati is going, whoever they're going to face, they're going to have a rivalry with because of just the way they play. And I think of just the competition in the Eastern Conference. It's not like, sure, you can single out guys like Columbus, maybe Chicago, definitely Nashville, like where there's a rivalry building. There's a rivalry. You have the hype, you have the videos going forward. But I think it's just the grit this team plays with in and out. And sometimes those yellow cards, I mean, sure, some people will have to sit on the bench sometimes this year with yellow card accumulation. But at the end of the day, that's maybe what the case is with the squad overall. Again, you get the job done on offense. Yerson Mosquera, first goal with the club this season. And looking at the game against Philadelphia should be interesting as the Union are currently in a 3-match, 8-day stretch, which includes 2 games against Atlas in the quarterfinals of the CONCACAF Champions League. Daniel Gazdag with the goal in that game against Atlas. I believe that was at home. Then they'll go to Mexico to try to get to the semifinals of that stage. But looking at their MLS play so far, a little bit of a rough start. 2 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. Again, this is a commanding team, and we saw it earlier in the year. But at the same time, I think it will be interesting to see how Curtin works this, because we've seen what other clubs like Brian Schmetzer has done when this team is in Champions League, where they're, let's say, their eggs are kind of going in their basket, and there's not much in MLS. And we kind of saw it with the Sounders last year, especially where they win CONCACAF Champions League, first ever MLS team to do so, but they missed the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. So there's kind of that disconnect overall on how those things work. We'll see how Philly comes out to play, but I think the thing about the Union is they have so much depth overall, especially up top. It seems like you can pull someone out of a hat and they'd be able to be there. Granted, they don't have Kasper Schwilko on that team, but you still have guys like Corey Burke. You still have Gazdag. You have Ura, who scored the winning goal against Cincinnati in that playoff match back in October. You have a lot of great keys for Philadelphia. I don't think it will be that offensive. Maybe it will. I mean, I said it last week that FC Cincinnati Miami would be offensive. Maybe it turns into another 1-0 bout, but nonetheless, it's another protege mentor battle between Jim Curtin and Pat Noonan. It will definitely be the case down the stretch, and I will definitely be tuning in for that one at TQL Stadium. Sure to be a good one. Sure to be some great action around Ohio this weekend, especially with MLS and MLB. I'm Mahirson Hassan, and once again, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown. Have a great week, stay safe, and I will see you next Friday.